Hello there. Welcome to my review of the Casebook of Sherlock Holmes, Series 2, Episode 3, The Eligible Bachelor. Another controversial episode amongst the fanbase, not just for the changes it makes to the original story, but also because of how it was shot. Both things I'll be looking at in my review. The episode begins with a highly agitated woman in an asylum, being transported to a new location, before we cut to Holmes and Watson discussing a case that seemed to conclude with the woman being locked up.
The misery there must be behind those walls. Well, another case concluded?
But this isn't explicitly stated. This opening scene is accompanied by the soundscape of different voices laughing maniacally, seemingly to suggest Holmes's own mental state after this case, although again this is not explicitly stated. The only clear intention is to unsettle, and it certainly does that. We then cut to a happier scene of a couple in love, Lord Robert St. Simon, played by Simon Williams, and Henrietta Hetty Duran, played by Paris Jefferson. He is showing her his ancestral home, and she, an American, is thoroughly impressed by this castle on a hill. He also shows her the jaguar compound at the estate zoo. It was common really up until the mid-20th century for anyone with money and land to basically keep any animals they wanted as pets, before people really took an interest in the welfare of animals or the dangers they might present to humans, as they're not often kept that securely. There are a litany of horror stories related to this practice where people with an interest in exotic pets, but no knowledge of how to care for them, would buy an animal and either feed it the wrong diet or see it die shortly afterwards because it wasn't suited to the British climate. But perhaps the worst practitioners of this was the royal family, who had a menagerie at the Tower of London for about 600 years. Elizabeth I granted free admission to the tower to anyone who brought a cat or dog to feed to the animals. People would be maimed trying to pet them, and worse still, under James I, they were set against each other or packs of hunting dogs for sport, a practice which continued until this was made illegal under Oliver Cromwell. We've seen these types of menageries crop up before in Sherlock, rich households keeping exotic pets, but this is the first time they've given us a scene where they've superimposed a character's face over that of an animal to apparently suggest something or other. This is my first problem with the episode. While the shot might be a clever camera trick, it doesn't do anything to progress the narrative or character arcs. Is it to suggest Hetty is a wild American animal who cannot be tamed or caged? Perhaps she's going to start using jaguar glands to become more cat-like. It wouldn't be the first time we've seen something like that. No, it's just a cool composition that has nothing to do with the story or character. We cut back to Sherlock having a nightmare about his last case and his life as a whole, including some visions of things that have not yet happened. Again, taking this into the realms of supernatural humbuggery, and while it's not obvious that this is what's going on at this stage, it actually makes the ending worse for it. Knowing Holmes has apparently gained some precognitive ability. Scenes of Holmes in mental distress are intercut with scenes of Hetty learning about the family she is about to marry into. Holmes is almost wraith-like as he stalks the streets of London, assaulted by esoteric imagery and chided by actress Flora Miller for watching a rehearsal of her new play.
We're being watched. I will not rehearse in front of strangers.
This is all somehow connected to St. Simon, as she is seen in her dressing room talking to a mirror which cuts to an image of St. Simon. What this all means is completely baffling at this stage in the episode. What we do know is that Hetty is marrying St. Simon. Her father is giving St. Simon an impressive dowry. His ancestral home is in ruin and unlivable, or so he makes a point of saying at every occasion.
But I'm not sure that living at Glarven is possible.
Holmes is in great distress because of his dreams, and is for some reason haunted by the actress Flora Miller. And she knows St. Simon and hates him. There's no case or mystery to solve at this stage, and Flora's failed attempt to shoot St. Simon comes to nothing. Finally, something reasonably relevant happens when Hetty's mood changes significantly almost the moment she's married. She sees a man in the church who startles her, and her previously sunny disposition is greatly changed. This, however, lacks the significance it should to the episode because so much has happened that is completely irrelevant window dressing. So far, we've had around 3 minutes out of 30 that have any relevance to any sort of plot. Unfortunately, this is followed by a very un-Holmesian scene where he tells Watson his dreams, but also that he regrets Moriarty's death as he hasn't had a challenging case since.
I regret Moriarty's death. Without him, I have to deal with distressed children and cat owners, pygmies! Pygmies of triviality!
Which would be fine if we hadn't seen him take on some very challenging cases where he himself has admitted that the cases were as challenging as Moriarty. Flora continues her assault on St. Simon, and while she fails to get him directly, she does stumble upon a fleeing Hetty, seemingly skipping out on her new husband. In Hetty's absence, St. Simon engages Holmes to find her, and, after Mrs. Hudson is given a message by another mystery woman, he tells Holmes his first wife died and his second marriage was annulled, but gives no reason. Meanwhile, the police have found Hetty's wedding dress in the river and have arrested Flora Miller for Hetty's murder. They found a note in the wedding dress signed FM and assumed it was from Miller, as she was seen hanging around the wedding. Holmes doesn't think this is the case and follows his own line. He discovers it was not Flora that took the shot at St. Simon, and that Flora told Hetty what a villain St. Simon was. Meanwhile, the mystery woman is revealed to be an Agnes Northcote, who covers herself because she was disfigured by St. Simon's zookeeper. Curiously, Agnes is played by Anna Calder-Marshall, the wife of the first Watson, David Burke. Agnes is the sister of St. Simon's second spouse, Helena. He had her committed to a madhouse, and it was in fact her we saw at the beginning. He used Flora Miller to impersonate Helena to prove she was mad when she was not, and Agnes was disfigured when she went looking for her sister at St. Simon's ancestral home. She was the one who took the shot at St. Simon. Holmes then tracks down the man who startled Hetty at her wedding and left the note signed FM, seemingly knowing everything that is going on, including that Hetty is this man's wife. Hetty was married to Francis Moulton in America, but thought he had been killed, so came to the UK a widow. Upon seeing him at the wedding and realising he was alive, she fled to be with him. While this is happening, St. Simon lures Flora to her theatre and drops a scenery flat on her, killing her. Hetty goes to see St. Simon at his ancestral home, not knowing the full extent of his evil, so Holmes and Watson rush to save her. St. Simon can't bear to kill her himself, so leaves her to Flotier, his zookeeper, and the murderer of his first wife. Holmes and Watson intercede, leaving him to the Jaguar, and Holmes pursues St. Simon, finding that he has been keeping Helena in his zoo, which has actually driven her feral but not mad, as she has spent her time rigging the roof to collapse on him, killing him. Helena is also played by Anna Calder-Marshall. She inherits the estate in St. Simon's death, and Holmes and Watson accompany the Northcote sisters to the opera. If my disdain for this episode was not clear in my review, then let me make it so here. This is a bad episode. It borrows elements from the stories that have already been adapted, along with some that haven't, in order to extend the mystery and make St. Simon into more of a villain, when in the original story he is just a bit arrogant. It takes too many different elements and attempts to blend them together to create the story, such as the 3 marriages of the so-called eligible Bachelor. Then tries to address this in the weakest way possible, with St. Simon saying he's trying to keep his previous marriages a secret, even though everyone seems to know about them. The subplot of the zoo and his hitman come zookeeper is a bit too much of a stretch, especially as we see he is perfectly capable of murder. So it then makes no sense why he is unable to murder either his second or third wife. All of these elements feel more like they are from Jane Eyre or Rebecca than a Sherlock Holmes story. The original plot of the story is partially spread out throughout this one until the resolution is quickly wrapped up so we can get to the villain getting his comeuppance. The addition of Holmes's breakdown, his belief in precognizant dreams, and the dreams coming true feels completely out of character and unbelievable at this point in the series, when we have seen him tackle many difficult and challenging cases since Moriarty's death. The choice of dropping shots from later scenes into earlier ones, and the bizarre shot selection and soundscape just doesn't work to tell a cohesive story, and ends up making it more confusing. And it's far too long, even for the extended story they're attempting to tell. The only thing I enjoyed about this episode are the performances. Every actor does a great job in their roles, and had they not, I expect the episode would have been entirely incoherent and baffling. Personally, I would have preferred if they had stuck closer to the original story and made this a regular episode, particularly as they never adapted A Study in Scarlet or The Valley of Fear, two full-length novels. While Valley of Fear would have been a challenge, A Study in Scarlet would have been a perfect choice for a feature-length adaptation instead of padding this short story with so many elements that simply don't work. Even with the strong performances from the cast, I think I have to rate this one a 0 out of 5, as it's less enjoyable than The Last Vampire. Thank you. Goodbye.